So we're filming outside today because it's so nice and hot. So today I'm doing a video on my volunteer trip to Malawi. So for those of you that don't know, back in October I went to Malawi for 3 months with a charity called VSO. They sort of work underneath the charity ICS, which stands for the International Citizen Service. So yeah, I'm basically doing this video to give you a bit of an insight on my trip and also the process to going on that trip. So I've separated the video into 4 sections so that if you came here for a particular bit you can just skip to it. So the first section is just a bit of information about VSO, ICS and the other partners that you can travel with. The second section is how to apply, the process that you have to go through, and also things like fundraising and action at home in a bit more detail. And then the third section is the day in the life, and the fourth and last section is like the things that I struggled with and the things that I really enjoyed. So yeah, we're just gonna jump right in. I've been meaning to film this for so long. It is part of my action at home, so it's to sort of promote VSO and the good work that they do, and it's to sort of be an active citizen and showcase how volunteering is really impactful. So yeah, that's that. So VSO stands for Voluntary Services Overseas. VSO's the main organisation under the International Citizen Service. I believe they get the most funding, and they also have the most trips that are happening at the moment. I'll insert a photo of all the different places that they go to, and they focus on health, I've got it all written down, health, livelihoods and education, but predominantly like sexual reproductive rights, and that's what I did when I went out there, which is so like HIV and AIDS, pregnancy prevention, looking after children, so if you can't prevent the pregnancy, then how to take care of them as an adolescent or as sort of a teenager if it's an unprepared pregnancy. And it's also just how to take care of yourself in general and to prevent like common diseases like malaria, stuff like that. And the other charities that you can go with, some of them have stopped funding, so you may have heard of them before but they won't be sort of happening anymore. So the 2 others that are still happening is Restless Development and Raleigh. Raleigh is more based around water and sanitation, so creating good water sources that they can use and teaching them the importance of sanitation in order to not get diseases like cholera, which is transferred through water. So yeah, and Restless Development is predominantly livelihoods, which is teaching them how to make use of the resources that they have. For example, if somewhere has a lot of farmers, then we want to teach them how to make use of that resource and how to make a profit from it in order to, you know, live happily, in order to live and have stability and things like that. So it's just making the most of the resources that they have access to, because you can tell them to become an entrepreneur and make their own business, and if they don't have the resources for that, then they can't do it. So that's what livelihoods is. And there's also education, which is improving, it can be general education, so like English, maths, all that sort of thing, and then it can be their education. We were educating them on diseases that they could come into contact with and how to prevent that. So on to the process of applying and all the details about that. So I'll insert the link below, but I'll also put it up on the screen for the VSO website. Obviously there are websites for Raleigh and Restless Development, but depending on what charity you'd want to work with, you can go onto their website. If you type it into Google, it will come straight up anyway. So basically with my sort of application process, a friend of mine applied and he started fundraising, and then I was thinking like, oh, that sounds pretty cool, like volunteering abroad and sort of making a difference. And I'd done a bit of traveling before and I really enjoyed it. And just before I went, a couple of months before, I volunteered in India as well, teaching English. And I loved that, so that sort of made it certain that I wanted to do this. And I applied on their website. You just fill out a form, put some details in, and then they will get back to you whether the answers that you put to the questions were sort of what they were expecting and what they wanted. And if you do get selected, you'll get an email inviting you to a selection day, which is basically a day where they do lots of team activities to see how you work in a team. So one of the activities we did was we had to make a bag out of all these resources that they would give us. So it was newspaper, sellotape, staples, and then we had resources to put in the bag to test how well it worked and whether it was durable. So we started making that, and then sort of halfway through they'd say, right, you can't have the scissors anymore, and then you have to continue making the product. And once you've made a certain amount, you have to try and sell them to the invigilators or assessors. So there would be assessors sort of sat around the room making notes, and they would be given particular people to make notes on. So they would be going around going like, Amy's doing this, or she's doing that. She's, say she's taking an active role as leading the team or directing people on what to do, or she's predominantly making it, or they would write things down as attributes. I wouldn't take any notice of them. I personally didn't notice them at all because they're sat around the room, and if you focus on what you're meant to be doing, then you really won't notice them. So we did that, and then when we actually came in, they told us to imagine that the floor was a map and stand where you want to go. And I stood on Africa because I had never been. I had been around Europe and India, and I knew that I was going to America soon and things like that, so I wanted to go somewhere where I knew that there were issues that I wanted to tackle. So we all stood in sort of different places, and they asked us our name and why we wanted to go there. So that was sort of the icebreaker. And then there was a series of debates in groups of 3 or 5, and you would each be given an argument and you have to back that up. And it's basically just teaching you that sometimes you will come into contact with these situations when you're out there, and you need to, one, be able to express the way that you're thinking in a situation, and also you need to be able to understand that there's certain situations which different cultures handle differently. So there were things like making your sexuality public, and obviously some countries have it as illegal to be gay, and they were trying to make us aware that they wouldn't want you to suppress that if you were, but they also don't want you to put yourself at risk. So it was sort of telling you about the kind of situations that you may come into contact with, and that was really, really helpful. And the first half of the morning, some people had their interviews, and the other sort of half of people had their interviews. So mine was in the afternoon. My interviewer was amazing. She was so lovely. I mean, they all were, but I didn't get to talk to most of the others. But they just asked you general health questions about like drinking, smoking, that sort of stuff, just to see whether you would be able to go 3 months without drinking, because some of the programs are dry programs, things like that. And then they went into why you want to do the program, and then they do a few scenario questions like what was it, a time that someone sort of confided in you and you couldn't tell someone else that information, so it's sort of how you supported that person and how you dealt with that situation. And they had, there's a bee. They had various situations like that, and I found those really helpful because it made you sort of think on the spot. Because you didn't know those questions were coming up, you would have to think, actually, when is a time that I did that? And it makes you more of like an active thinker. So that was really good. And so that was the selection day. And then it was probably about 2 weeks before I heard back that I had been sort of accepted to the next process. So they sent me all the fundraising details. You get set up a profile on the VSO like portal that you can get any information and ideas about fundraising. You also get lots and lots of emails of ideas from the staff at the London office, which they are great. Like, they send you so much information that is really useful. And then you set up your Just Giving page, and do not set it up before you get sent a link, because I heard about a few people that had set it up before they got sent the link through VSO, and because Just Giving doesn't know that you are with VSO, they will tax you on your funds, which means that you would have to raise 20% more than your given quota, which for some people meant that all of the money got taken away. So yeah, they told a few horror stories about fundraising, so definitely wait until you get all the information from them. So yeah, I got that, and then I started fundraising. So the things that I did was I did a bake sale at my work, which was really, really good because everyone loves cake and it's just a fun way to do it. Like, I made so many decorations, I made so much food. It was a bake sale, but we also included food. And then I did a World Food Day later on, which was really good. So the council that I worked at was like all councils are, but it was very cultural. There were lots of people from different places, so lots of people made different things. So I tried to sort of go out of my comfort zone and make something that I hadn't made before from a different country apart from England. So yeah, that was really successful. I made probably £400 from that, I think, because I did a raffle as well. So I'll put some photos in actually, because I've still got them. But I did a raffle with all the prizes and things, and I got some really good prizes. I went round, you can go around all the restaurants, and if you give them a letter from VSO, so you have to request that, then they will literally give you vouchers for your raffle. So they are really, really helpful. And I recommend going in because they prefer talking to you in person way more than you sending them an email asking for something. It is not effective. They want to see you, they want to hear about what you're doing. And a lot of the time they will talk to you. Some of them were saying, where are you going? Like, all this stuff. And I was saying, oh, I'm going to Malawi. Like, I'm raising money for this. So they really want to get involved. So yeah, I also did a half marathon in Buckingham, near where I live. And that was probably one of the toughest things I'd done, because it was a very hot day. Considering it was in May, in England it was very, very hot. It was one of the weeks we had a heat wave last year, so it was painful, but that raised a lot of money because I did a sweepstake for my time, which is another thing I'd recommend, because people will donate for you doing the half marathon, but they'll also donate for the time. So I did £1 and they would guess the time, and then whoever won I would give £10 to them out of like the 70 that I'd raised from the sweepstake. But the person that actually won, I think, gave it back to me. They said, oh no, like, put it towards the rest of your charity. So that was quite nice. What else did I do? I did a car boot sale, which is also a really nice thing. I would recommend it if it's a popular thing around where you live. Around me, the sort of stuff that I was selling wasn't very popular because it was more of an older crowd at the car boot. There weren't as many young people, so all of the things that I was selling were sort of not the right sizes or not the right style, so that didn't really help. But I still raised about £50, I think, at the car boot, so it was reasonable. And sort of every little helps. You'll be surprised how much £5 donations from people can add up as soon as you get a couple of them. So yeah, that was everything I did fundraising wise. And then I went to a training day, which was a month before I left, and they basically did health training, airport training, and security training. So the airport was like a acting scenario, so it was basically how not to act and how to act in an airport situation, because customs in different countries are very different, and the customs in England are a lot nicer than ones that maybe you experienced in Africa, because the culture is different, and whenever you go to a different country, they will treat you differently, depending on the country that you go to. So they were teaching us the sort of ways to act, like you don't want to disrespect the people working in customs, because then they might take that offensively, and you know, things like laughing and you know, smiling a bit too much at your friends, they might take that the wrong way, because different things in different cultures mean different things. So yeah, that was really helpful, and they got like actors in and stuff, so that was interesting. And then we did health training, which they went through all the diseases, all the things to look out for. They showed us images, which some of them were not nice, and it was basically things like, what is it? There's one where it's like a worm that will it will enter through your foot, and it's like, it's a tiny speck, and you won't notice it until it actually gets bigger, and then they have to pull it out, and it's really disgusting. Sorry to have said that, but yeah, they went through all of that, which was really good, because then you know what to look out for, so we found that so helpful. A lot of the stuff that they tell you to put in your health kit, you probably won't use, but at the same time, you have to take it, because we all brought such a hefty first aid kit and health kit with all these like TCP plasters, blister plasters, all these different like ointments and things like creams that we needed, and half the time you wouldn't use them, but there were the odd people that maybe grazed their whole leg if they, you know, fell down a slope or something, and they needed that TCP, so they were glad that they brought it. But like for myself, where I didn't injure myself, I was probably thinking, oh, I didn't need it, but it's worth taking it anyway, just as a precaution. And it's the sort of thing where when you bring it home, you will use it. You can put it in the cupboard, and at some point you'll probably use it. So yeah. And then the security training was basically listen to curfew, things to look out for in your town, like don't go up and talk to complete strangers, things like that, things to not necessarily talk about in certain situations because that might not be appropriate, things like that. And then they did a general overview of what to expect with your host family, settling in, the fact that we will be in one big group going out there. We're one of the largest groups, so they were going into detail about that. Little did we know that we would be separated into East and West, which we didn't know until we got there, but it turns out that the teams worked so well, and you saw each other at the office, so it was fine. And then fast forward to about 3 or 4 weeks later, and we were getting on the plane and going. So yeah, we all got on the plane together, and everything was done together, like all the travelling on the way there and the way back. So you don't have, I was worrying, thinking when I get to the airport, how am I gonna meet everyone? Like, is everyone gonna be there? And definitely they're all there. You don't have to worry about that. There's a meeting point and everything. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. Also, I forgot to mention, VSO reimburse your expenses. So for like the selection days, the training, like the return volunteer weekend that will happen after, which is like a review of your trip, and also on the way to the airport, those expenses are all paid for. You just have to either get VSO to book your trains or taxis or whatever it is, or you have to send them receipts for those purchases. So I got them to book it for me because it was just easier. I hate booking trains online because I find it so confusing. So I found it easier for them to do it for me. And they send you all the details with times, ticket numbers, collection codes, so you can just pick them up at the train station and you don't pay anything. You just have to scan a card so that it can sort of register. So yeah, that was all paid for, so that was really good. So yeah, now I'm going to go into the day in the life. It's quite brief because a lot of the days were very similar, but it just gives you an overview of what sort of was going on and what to expect. So during the week, you would like wake up, you would have breakfast with your family. My family were very set on eating together. I mean, back in England, I eat in my room every night, but there it was very important that you would eat with them. So I definitely would recommend respecting those views. So if they would like you to eat at the table rather than at the sofa, then respect that. You might find that in 3 weeks, they will happily let you eat in your room, but just for definitely the first few weeks when you're trying to get to know them, respect things like that. So then we would leave for the office. The office was in the centre of town, but it was different for different people as to how far away it was. Some people were a 5-minute walk away. I was an hour and a half walk away. Some days I would walk in because it was nice and hot, so I wanted to get a tan, I wanted to get exercise, and I didn't want to pay for the taxis because that comes out of your own money or your allowance. So if you go in taxis a lot, then it might go over your allowance that you get for the week. We got about 8,000 kwacha for the week, which I believe is about £8, and that would be for taxis, lunch, basically anything that you may need. I took £100 with me, which was about 10,000 kwacha. So I took that with me for things like clothes, gifts, that sort of thing. And I would definitely recommend taking that money. So yeah, you would get that allowance. So we would get there in the morning. Most mornings, definitely Mondays, were planning. Then the other mornings, depending on whether you had a session or not, you could plan some more or you would be going to a session. So at about maybe 9 or 10, we would leave for our session, and each week there would be a set topic on what the session is on. So we did gender, HIV and AIDS. I'm trying to think now, it's like putting me on the spot. Pregnancy prevention, care of adolescents, and many more. And each week we would have to come up with a presentation for that. So that was really, really good. I loved the session so much. So we had prepared this session and we will go and deliver it to, it could have been 3 schools some days it was just 1, some days it was none, because you would get cancellations and you have to be prepared to sort of give in to that, because a lot of the time we were getting a bit frustrated. We would say, well, why haven't they let us know that they're cancelling? And it's just the culture. They're very laid back, and you have to accept that sometimes they might be late or they might cancel last minute or not turn up at all. So that's one thing that I definitely got used to. So then we would come back to the office for lunch, and then we would usually go back out again, and we might finish or get back. It can be any time between 3 and 5:30 that we would get back, depending how far away the CBO is. They're called CBOs, and it's community-based organisations. So they were like youth groups and schools and churches and all sorts. So we would, each of the sessions probably had, thing is it was so unknown when it came to the sessions. There could be 30 people or there could be 60. I mean, sorry, my camera just ran out of battery and I don't have enough battery for it, so I've just switched onto my phone to do this last bit. So as I was saying, the CBOs were very unpredictable when it came to how many people there were. We kept on asking for more information every day. We would ask for more information because they would tell us that there was 30 people coming, and we got to this school in particular and there could be 60 kids or there could be 100 one day, and it was so unpredictable. And when you're creating a interactive session for kids, if there's 100 kids, you can't do any activities or games or things because there's too many. Like, you would just have to talk at them for an hour, or play games outside. So it was very unpredictable in that sense, which was kind of frustrating. But now you look back on it, you think, even though it was frustrating in the moment, I'm still really happy that I did the trip and it didn't ruin it in any way. So I would definitely say that. So try and get as much information as you can on the sessions because they are so unpredictable. But yeah, so we would try and plan for maybe 30 people. Sometimes you would get 5, so then you would probably want a more interactive session. So you will need to be on the spot, like thinking actively, because if you turn up and there's 5 kids, you need to make it a lot more interactive than if there is 30 people there, because they're going to get bored. So you have to change it up depending on the amount of people there. So you have to be very open to last minute changes, and that's definitely something that I learned going there, because things could change so last minute. I mean, you could plan a session that you're really proud of and then they get a phone call and you're not going anymore. Like, we practiced the session and we were really happy with it, and then we got there and they weren't coming, or we waited for 2 hours and they didn't turn up. So you just have to be very accepting of those circumstances, and that's definitely one thing that the trip teaches you. So yeah, say we come back at 4 o'clock, our curfew was 6, so that would mean that if we wanted to, we could either go home and spend time with the family, or you could go around the local market. There was so many really cheap clothes. I got clothes for what they would say maybe a couple of hundred kwacha, which is anything from 10 to 50p. So they were very, very cheap, and you could also buy things that were more expensive. So you might pay £2 for it, and it's a really nice dress, and it's just easier to buy stuff there because then you fit in a bit more because you're wearing local dress. Or I mean, some of it was quite like similar to English clothes, but it was just because you bought it from there, it was more acceptable. There were elements to it that would make it more acceptable, like covering your shoulders or covering your knees. So yeah, that was really nice to go around the markets. That was quite fun. Or we found a couple of cafes. So there was this place called U Lodge, which we absolutely loved, and we would go there pretty much every day, and it was really, really nice. Like, our group was very, very close. I've heard from other volunteers that went on completely different trips that they were maybe close with 1 or 2 people, but our whole group was close, and I absolutely love that because it means that we were a good group. We worked well together, and it was really nice. Like, and we still meet up now, and we did the return volunteer weekend, and we're hoping to do something soon, I think. And it's just nice to have those connections with people that have similar interests, like volunteering and having an active impact on another country. So yeah, and then there was the weekend. So it's quite confusing because some days were the same and some days were completely different. On the weekends there were CADs, which is Community Action Days, which they did, I think, 5 throughout our whole cycle. And they're basically an event that you organise which targets the community rather than the youth groups that you might have worked with before. So we went to youth groups during the week. So this is targeting the actual villages. So you would pick a location and a topic. So a lot of the time we did sexual health because that was what we were teaching in the schools. And you would make it a fun day, so you can have DJs, you can have dance competitions, you can have food, you can have football games, all sorts. So we had a lot of ideas for that, and I'll insert some photos throughout of just little bits that we did. So I really liked the CADs. We did have a few issues with some of them, but it was nothing that hasn't been resolved now. So yeah, it's just another thing that you learn from. They were all sort of big learning curves for us. and there were difficulties in coming to decisions with our fellow volunteers that were from Malawi. But again, you just have to sort of accept that there's differing opinions depending on, like, the English volunteers had differing opinions to the Malawi volunteers, but eventually we would come to some kind of agreement and sort of compromise. So if you weren't doing a CAD on, say, a Saturday, they were usually on, you would maybe do your washing or tidy the house or cook lunch, or you can go out for the day. So I would have to do my own washing. We didn't have a washing machine, so I'd have to hand wash it. So I usually did that on Saturdays, and then I was never required to clean the house. We had they called him a houseboy, so like a maid, and he would clean up and cook. So I would sometimes help cooking, but a lot of the time they didn't want me to. I would always wash up because I felt like I was doing something, because sometimes I felt a bit bad, as if I wasn't sort of playing my part in being part of the family. So I would definitely say try and do as much as you can, or as much as they will let you, because a lot of the time they don't want you to do anything. So it's kind of hard to say, no, I'm cooking tonight, because they say, well, no, I don't want you to. So you don't want to push it too much, but you also don't want to do nothing. And I would definitely say try and spend some time with, if you have any kids in your family, try and spend some time with them and play games, but also spend some time with, like, your host mum or host dad, because they really appreciate that. I used to watch TV with my host mum every night, and it was a program I'd never heard of, but by the end of the trip I was absolutely addicted, because it was more so that I could spend time with her rather than to watch TV. I would happily not watch TV, but that's what she liked to do, so I sort of wanted to do that with her. And then we went on, like, days out if we weren't busy. So there was a dam near us, which is obviously a dam, but it's for a massive lake. So we would go and sit there by the side of the lake, and it was beautiful. I'll insert a picture. And when you think of a dam, I just thought of a literal dam. I didn't think it would be pretty at all, and it was amazing. And it was hidden behind the trees, because it was about 15 minutes from my house, and I never knew it was there until about 6 weeks in. So yeah, it was beautiful. So yeah, we went to, like, the dam, or we would go into town and go shopping. If we didn't have any time during the week to go to the markets, then we might go on the weekends. So it just depends how much free time you have. And then on Sundays, some people would go to church with their family. I went, I think, once, and then I was either busy the other times, or they left before me, because a lot of the time their church the service starts at about 8, so you have to leave at least 7:30, and I would maybe get up at 8 and then they had already gone, so they never used to like to wake me, so yeah, sometimes I just missed out, but it was still really good. And I went to a service which was during the week, it was a bit like a concert, where they would have singing, but it was outside on a big stage, and I went to that a couple of times. So even though I didn't go to church as much, I went to that with my family, so that's sort of makes up for it. And then alternating weeks, we would have these things called ACDs, which are active citizenship days, and that is basically talking about something that you're passionate about and trying to teach your fellow volunteers. So because I am very passionate about the dairy and meat industry, I did a talk on veganism. So I talked all about what veganism is, what vegetarianism is, the dairy industry, the meat industry, like statistics about them, because I was telling them this, and in Malawi it's very common to eat pretty much anything. They would eat, like, chicken legs, chicken gizzards, like all this stuff, you know, like goat, all sorts. And I wanted to sort of educate them on why I don't, because they all knew that I was vegan, so, and there was also a couple of other volunteers that were, so they were probably curious, so I thought it'd be interesting to do that. So I did that talk, and a lot of people said how interesting it was and how they didn't realise like that those sort of statistics related to maybe climate change and the environment were so closely linked to the animal industry. So that was a really interesting thing for me to do, and it was quite confidence building, because not only did people enjoy it and say that it was really good, which was sort of useful to me, that made me feel good about myself, it also was one of the things that I hate to do. I really dislike public speaking, and this whole trip made me so much more confident with that. Like YouTube, you're talking to a camera, there's no one there, whereas talking to classes of 70 kids that are laughing at you, that aren't necessarily speaking English sometimes, and you don't know what they're saying, they could be joking about you, and it just made me a lot more confident. I was thinking, you know what, I don't care what they're saying, I'm just going to teach them, and if they don't want to learn, then that doesn't matter. And then as the weeks go on, they would start to listen to you, because they realise, one, you're here to stay, you're not doing 1 week of sessions and then leaving. We did 10 weeks, 5 sessions a week, so they started to realise, yes, this is actually a useful session to be in, so I want to be here, I want to behave. So yeah, that was like really rewarding towards the end. I think that's pretty much everything that we did. Like, most of the days was just sessions in the morning, sessions in the afternoon. Some of the sessions could be outside, some of them could be in a brick room, some of them could be in a proper school with, you know, proper chalkboards and things that you can write on, whereas some were just a brick building with no chalkboards, no seats, so you would have to work with that. So you have to adapt to your surroundings. So that's another thing that I was saying about adaptability. You need to be able to think, I can't use paper for this session because we're outside, so you make it more interactive. So some people would do theirs on tennis courts, so they would predominantly make it speaking only and quite short with activities, because they knew that they couldn't just use those resources outside because it wouldn't work as well. So there's lots of different things that come into it. So now I'm just going to briefly go through the things that I learn and like struggles. So the biggest struggle was probably the culture difference. There was a lot of things like eating with the family, talking in certain ways, like things that you can talk about to your family, like the curfew that you weren't sort of used to, but you got used to eventually. So there were struggles in the beginning, but towards the end they were normal. And also working cross-culturally. I thought that would be so much easier than it was, and it's nothing towards like the fellow Malawi volunteers and the Malawi team, because we were both sort of bad in our different ways. So like, we would give an opinion on a way of doing things, and they might say, well, we don't want to do that, and those were the struggles. But eventually you would get to a decision and it was okay. But we were all sort of used to saying an opinion and being in agreement with each other, because the UK volunteers were so sort of close-knit that we would come to decisions easily. So when they wouldn't agree with us, we would be like, well, how are we supposed to resolve this if they sort of don't want to involve themselves? And there were incidents where sort of the UK volunteers had more of a input than the Malawi volunteers. They weren't getting as involved, but you just have to sort of work through it and put a better face on than they have, so that when you get reviewed and when you get your references done, because you will get like midpoint reviews where they sort of ask you how you're doing, you just have to say, well, I'm trying. Like, even if we're not getting to the point that we need to, I'm still doing as much as I can, and that's the main thing. As long as you're putting an input in, then it doesn't matter whether someone's not having any input on you know, various things, because at least you're doing everything you can. So just put in as much effort as you can. Another thing was homesickness. I really suffered with that, like halfway through, because we had the mid-phase review where we went to a beach and it was really nice. It was a little bit like a holiday, where it felt like it because you weren't teaching for those 2 days that we went, and it just sort of makes you realise, oh, this is a good end point, I want to go home. And obviously then you have to go back and teach for another 6 weeks or 5 weeks, and it becomes quite difficult because you think, I've just been on this sort of makeshift like holiday, non-working 2 days, and then you have to go back to reality, and it is kind of tough because we became so close on that mid-phase review that it would have been nice to end at that point, but you couldn't do that because otherwise you'd be doing 10 weeks of teaching, which would be quite tough. So that was definitely a struggle, but I definitely recommend just talking to either your counterpart if you're close with them. I didn't feel close enough to mine to talk to her about that, but I definitely talked to the English volunteers about it. And a lot of the time everyone's in the same boat. Everyone is missing their family and things as much as you are. I definitely did, because like my family were having birthday get-togethers, and like we have family buffets and things like that, and I have 6 siblings, so there's a lot of family members, and they were doing all these get-togethers, and I could see it on social media because I had my phone with me out there, and yeah, it's sort of, you think, oh, I want to be there, but you sort of get over it eventually. Yes, those are pretty much the struggles, and like time, because they're always late. They're not in as much of a rush as we are, because in England you always want to be 15 minutes early, whereas they're either on time or late. But you get used to it eventually, and you end up being late for things. Like I was late to the office the odd time because I was getting used to it too much. Yeah, so it wasn't that bad. Like I really enjoyed it. I had an amazing time. So the struggles weren't as bad as they seemed when I was initially out there. So my favourite parts was probably teaching. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The first week I absolutely hated it. I thought I was gonna regret the whole trip, but when I actually got into the swing of things, I really appreciated it. And when you saw how much the kids appreciated it, that made you love it even more. The interaction from them and asking questions and things like that, it just made you think, okay, I'm doing something good. And I loved my host family. It was an all-female family, apart from a nephew, but he was about 14. The other 5 girls were amazing, and they were so lovely, like so welcoming. A couple of them spoke English, so that was really nice. I mean, it all depends. You do have to accept that with host homes you can get a one-person family where you just live with one person and they don't speak much English and that's it, or you could have a very large family. You could have one with no pets, or you could have one with 10 dogs. So it just depends. You could have a bedroom with just a bed in it, or you could have one with a wardrobe, a TV, so big lounge, you know, so it just depends, but that all makes your trip. Even though some of our host homes were very contrasting, we all enjoyed it thoroughly. So there were times where people said, this is really difficult because of my host home being sort of less developed, I guess you could say. So they didn't have proper roofs and things like that, but in the end they managed to work through it, and that's sort of their difficulties rather than mine, so I won't go into that. But yeah, so I think that's everything. I hope you found this helpful. It was part of my action at home to sort of spread the word about volunteering and how really good VSO is as a charity and all the things that they're doing to prevent poverty and improve education, health, livelihoods, all that kind of stuff. and check out the link in this if you want to apply. They do about, I think it's 3 cycles or 4 cycles a year, and they're 12 weeks long, and it really does change your perspective on things and makes you appreciate things a lot more. Yeah, and it gives you some really good skills. Yeah, I went for an interview when I came back, and all the experiences that I could draw from this trip were so useful, and they found it so interesting as well, because you're not just saying, oh, I worked in a team on this occasion and did this. I was like, when I was in Malawi working on a community action day with the local community, I did this, and they were like, wow, that's so cool. Like, they find it so interesting. So yeah, it's definitely really good for employers, and you get a reference when you get back, and you should get a certificate as long as you complete your action at home. So yeah, it was a really, really good experience. And if you want to see my 2 other vlogs, which are a series of photos and videos, I will link them at the end. And that just sort of shows you all of everything I saw on the trip, all of the photos, all of the things that I did, so they're really good as well. They're quite far back, so that's why I'll link them, because I did them about 2 months ago. But yeah, and check out VSO's website if you're interested. And yeah, if you enjoyed, please give this a thumbs up. I spent a lot of time planning it, and I've put a lot of effort into it because I want it to be useful. I want people to do these sorts of things because volunteering is very important to me. And yeah, and comment down below if you've done a volunteering trip, whether it's with ICS or whether it's one of the paid ones that you can do, like with Real Gap, because I would love to hear about your trips. So yeah, and until the next video, bye!